Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on religious diversity. And we alluded to this in our previous lecture, the notion that we are immersed in cultures and societies that are as diverse as they've ever been, especially out here where we live. And the question is, how do we respond to this diversity? What's our approach to living amongst other people that have such varieties of views of the world and how to relate to the world? Well, let's remember back to the very first week of the course when we discussed what the course was going to be about. We knew we were going to be discussing various religions. And specifically, I told you the following two things would be studied about these religions. The first, we discuss how each of these religions made sense of the world, how they saw humanity's place in the grand scheme of the world. And this, in a sense, is what we refer to as the human condition. Every religion we looked at had a description of what the condition of human beings was, or what the typical condition of humanity is. Whether it's trapped in suffering, whether it's separated from our original state or separated from our ideal state, whether it's trapped in an illusion where we're living inauthentic lives. Every religion seemed to have some sort of story, some sort of narrative that gave our lives context, right? Some sort of narrative that provided a background for how to make sense of what we go through on a daily basis in the grand scheme of things. The second thing that I mentioned at the very beginning of our term, was that each of these religions would also provide some sort of prescription. What is it we can do to live life best? And we refer to this as the means or the ways in which various religions say we can transcend the human condition. How is it that we can go beyond the human condition to live more idyllic, fulfilling, meaningful lives? So, in order to have this discussion, we looked at various religions, including in some indigenous religions. And in one sense, we were exposed to a variety of ways of looking at the world. We were exposed to a variety of ways of looking at ourselves and how we relate to the world. And the question to pose now then is what to do next. How do we move forward? What's the best response to other people that have different viewpoints from ourselves? Well, traditionally, there are 6 common approaches to religious diversity. The first is an atheistic approach, which in a nutshell is claiming that all religions are wrong and that the person who is atheist says, I don't believe in them because they're not true. Right. So one thing to think about for yourself is why might an atheistic approach to religion be a useful approach? Why would it be useful to say these religions are not true? And why might it not be useful? So if you're living amongst other people in a world of other people where each individual has their own perspective on reality and how to live best within reality, why might it be a useful approach to say, no, I think all of these approaches are wrong? Something to think about. A second approach would be to be agnostic. An agnostic would say, I don't believe in these religions because I just don't know. It's a declaration of ignorance, right? I just don't have enough information. I'm just not. I don't know enough to come to a conclusion about the validity of these religions. Right? This is agnosticism. So again, you might want to think about for yourself is why might having an agnostic approach to religious diversity be useful? Why might it be useful to live amongst other people with various religious beliefs or non-beliefs and say, I'm taking the approach that I just don't know? Why might that be a useful approach? Now, why also might that be not so useful? A third approach would be religious exclusivism. Religious exclusivism would be epitomized by a person that says, I believe only one religion is correct and all other religious approaches to life are mistaken. So Religious exclusivism is often associated with some sort of fundamentalism. And fundamentalism is simply a strong or strict adherence to certain beliefs, or a strict literal adherence to certain ideals. So you can imagine then, if you have a strict adherence to the belief that uh, your particular point of view is correct, then obviously you're going to be exclusivistic towards other religions, right? They can't also be true too, because mine is the only correct one. Can you think of what religions have fundamentalist sects? Can you imagine what sort of religions have branches or groups within them that are fundamentalist? All religions do, right? All religions have individuals that have strict adherence to certain beliefs, strict adherence to certain ideas, or have a strict literal interpretation of certain scripture, so much so that they see their religion as having to exclude others. Can fundamentalism be associated with atheism? Well, if fundamentalism is just the idea of having strict adherence to certain beliefs and strict adherence to certain ideas, then sure, you don't have this, there's nothing about that definition of fundamentalism that's associated with atheism. And there are some folks within the religious who are religious that see something referred to as scientism arising, the belief or the strict adherence to scientific knowledge, the strict belief that the only type of knowledge that is useful or valid is knowledge gained through the scientific method. So you can be a fundamentalist whether you're a religious person or a non-religious person. You can have strict beliefs, strict adherence to ideas, if you believe in God or if you don't believe in God. What we see seemingly is a rise in fundamentalism. We see much more now the idea or a growth in the number of people that have a strict adherence to certain beliefs and ideals. Now, why might this be? Why might this number be growing? Well, one way to look at this is that there's rapid globalization. So secular ideas, secular beliefs are much more easily spread, and we can all relate to one another using um, uh, non-religious belief systems and non-religious perspectives as our foundation, right? So remember, when we take a look at various religious traditions, they all kind of stem from various geographical locations. And if we think of a secular point of view or a secular worldview, worldview without religion or worldview without God, this can be something that's in common amongst various people from various areas. So that could be a part of it. Another part too, at least claimed by Karen Armstrong, is that what we see is a world that has more emphasis on logos sort of knowledge of fact. There seems to be much more emphasis and significance placed on that form of knowledge as opposed to mythos knowledge, right? Knowledge of experience. And you can judge this for yourself. Take a look at your own culture, take a look at the people around you, and maybe you see things are only true if, right, if they can be proven factually. Knowledge is only valuable if it corresponds to a declarative sentence that corresponds to reality. There are tables in the room, as opposed to knowledge that you might get through poetry, or knowledge that you might get through living in the world. Because of the rise of science and the rise of technology, there seems to be more value placed on logos type knowledge, at least according to Karen Armstrong. Now, again, one thing to think about is, why would religious exclusivism be a useful approach? Why might it be useful to say, no, there's only one correct religion and all other religions are wrong? Oftentimes you'll notice that one correct religion is whatever religion this person adheres to, but why might this be a useful approach, and why obviously might this not be so useful? Why might it be a detriment to just believe that amongst a world where you live amongst other people, various perspectives, there's only one correct approach to reality, one correct description of the human condition? Another common approach is to be a religious inclusivist. And A religious inclusivist might say something like, I believe only one religion is fully correct, while all others have partial truths to them. There's one religion that is completely true, completely valid, but all other religions have an aspect of truth or contain a kernel of truth. Well, the religious inclusivist idea kind of stems from the notion that when we take a look at all these traditions, there seems to be something useful amongst them all. There seems to be something um, worthwhile that we can learn from all these religions. And for a person that grows up in and belongs to a particular religion, they might see certain teachings and certain beliefs that are shared amongst all these religions. Excuse me. So they see that there's some truth in them. But there's still this sense that there's only one religion that has the complete truth. There's only one religion whose narrative and whose framing of reality is fully correct. Again, before we go to our typical questions, for some people, there is a sense, though, that being a religious inclusivist is still exclusivist in a way. Do you see how that might work? That one can claim to be a religious inclusivist, believing that, hey, look, I believe that my religion is fully correct, but I'm more than I can see that there is some validity to all others. I'm being inclusive of them. It sounds very good on the surface, but can you see how some people would interpret this as still being exclusivist in a certain way? Okay, so back to our traditional questions. Why might an inclusivist approach be useful? If you're living in a world amongst other people, can you see how being open to all perspectives as having some sort of truth to them, how that might be useful to have? This sort of philosophy being useful to have. Again, on the flip side, why or what problems could arise as a result? What could be an issue with being a religious inclusivist? Number five, and a very popular approach, especially in our region of the world, is religious relativism. And religious relativists believe that each religion can be considered true for their believers. Religion cannot be proven objectively. There's no way to apply a scientific method, an objective method of fact finding, to determine which religion is true or more true. Therefore, what we can say is that if the religion works for that person, then it's true for that person. If this other religion works for this other person, then it's true for that person, right? So the religious relativist is not saying anything about the objective truth or validity of any religion. They're not saying this religion is right or that religion is right. They're simply saying that if it works for them, from their point of view, if it speaks to them, then it's true for them. From their point of view, because they grew up in a different area, because they grew up at a different time, because of where they live, maybe this religion is true for them. Right? A relativistic approach. Again, think about it. Why might this be useful? A useful approach if we're living in a world amongst other people with other religious beliefs. And can you think of why this might not be so useful? Why being a religious relativist might be short-sighted or short-changing religions in some way. Now, the last approach we'll talk about is religious pluralism, and it's probably the most complex approach in some ways. Religious pluralists believe that every major religion is correct. Every major religion is valid. And we can acknowledge the differences while still coexisting in society. That we can live amongst people that have various religious beliefs, and we can say, no, Judaism is correct. At the same time, Taoism is correct. At the same time, Buddhism is correct. Not that it's just correct for them, but it is a valid approach to experiencing reality. It's a valid approach to describing the human condition. Now, how is this possible? How can Taoism be correct and Christianity be correct and Islam be correct and and Hinduism be correct? How could all of these religions that seemingly have various ways of describing the human condition and how to transcend the human condition, how can they all be said to be correct? There are various approaches to religious pluralism. The most popular way of looking at religious pluralism is through what's referred to as the perennial philosophy. Now, the idea with the perennial philosophy, I should say that the perennial philosophy stems from a belief that throughout time, people have realized that all religions are really talking about the same thing. That perennially, right, through time, when we see and hear all of these various religions, what we're really hearing are different cultures describing the same reality, just with different language, just with different um, cultural frames to them. So, a visualization of this is to think of religions as all pointing towards the same ultimate nature of reality. Whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, they all speak of some sort of ultimate. They all speak to some sort of underlying true reality. And they all say that we are somehow distant from it, that we are somehow removed from it, right? Whether because we're trapped in illusion, whether it's because we're trapped in selfish desire, whether it's because we simply forgot, whether it's right. All of these are really different ways of saying the same thing. So for the perennial philosopher, all religions are really pointing to the same peak. They're really pointing to the same ultimate end, the same ultimate goal, the same ultimate reality. And each of the religions, because they stem from different cultures, are articulating different paths to that same ultimate reality. Well, when we take a look at Eastern religion, we talked about how a lot of people, or a lot of the religion, is based upon people having mystical experiences. And in fact, the Eastern traditions emphasize having these experiences. They kind of emphasize with the adherents, with the people that follow the religions, with the religion, you should have these experiences for yourselves. So whether it's the Buddha, whether it's the Hindu Rishi, there's a sense that you can have an experience beyond your ordinary one that can give you a glimpse at the ultimate nature of reality, right? You can find yourself in line with the Tao. You don't have to just read about it. You don't have to learn from a teacher what the Tao is like. No, you can experience the Tao. You can experience nirvana. You can experience unity with Brahma. Even though it's not as emphasized popularly in the West, even though it's not emphasized as popularly in the Abrahamic traditions, even the Abrahamic traditions have a have in their past emphasized these same sorts of mystical experiences. And when we take a look at how these religions were founded, they seem to also be founded by people that have had these sort of extraordinary experiences of reality. Whether it's Moses having a direct experience of God, right? Whether it's Jesus having a direct experience of the Father, whether it's the Prophet Muhammad having a direct experience of the divine voice in order to recite the Quran, going into a trance. All of these religions seem to be founded by people that have had these mystical experiences. So what we see in common is these various religions that at their foundation kind of stem from human beings having some sort of direct experience of what ultimately is real. Human beings having some sort of extraordinary experience of what is ultimately true, right? It is this ultimate truth, this ultimate reality that we see as being the peak or the ultimate goal of all of these faiths. So we see all these religions pointing to, according to perennial philosophy, all these religions point to the same reality. Any sort of variations that we've heard about as we've gone through the past 11 weeks, any sort of variations like calling something Brahman versus God versus Allah, it's all variations in culture. It's all variations in language. When we talk about escaping samsara and releasing ourselves from Tana and aligning ourselves with the Tao, or trying to fulfill the covenants. Perennial philosophy says these are all just different wrappings of the same phenomena. These are all different terminology. This is all different terminology, different words, and different ways of saying the same sort of thing. The only reason they sound different is because they come from different cultures, so they express it differently. But at the core, says the perennial philosophy, is that they all teach the same sort of life wisdom. They all teach the same sort of life lesson that can allow a person to better flourish. So Aldous Huxley articulates the perennial philosophy in his book entitled The Perennial Philosophy. And when we take a look at some of the core ideas and some of the foundational concepts of each of the major world religions, it seems to people like Huxley that they all are pointing to the same reality, that they're all describing uh, the same approach to living one's life. So let's identify some of these similar ideas, these core concepts. The first is that the perennial philosophy says that when we take a look at each of these major religions, they all indicate that everything arises from some sort of absolute foundational ground, that everything uh, is manifested from some sort of sacred, uh, divine essence, whether it's matter, whether it's consciousness, it all comes from there. So you can think of how Abrahamic traditions believe we all come from God. You can think of how Hindus believe that everything is Brahma. Everything comes from, everything that we experience is a result of Brahma. What we also see in the perennial philosophy is this notion that humans can have knowledge of this absolute through experience and intuition. That when we take a look at all the major world religions, they seem to say we can know, we can have knowledge of this absolute, this foundational ground from which everything arises, this ultimate reality. We can have knowledge of it, but it's knowledge of experience. It's knowledge through experience. It's knowledge through intuition. It's not declarative knowledge that the um, the case is rectangle or knowledge that the remote is black. It's not that sort of declarative knowledge. It's knowledge of experience. It's knowing the reality, right? It's having contact and relation to the reality. So when we take a look at things like Zen Buddhism and Sufi stories and parables of Jesus, Jnana Yoga, we see that there is an attempt to bypass the mind's rational approach to knowing, to bypass the mind's analytical, linear approach to understanding the world through declarative fact, in order to get in touch with a different mode of experiencing the world, a different mode of knowing the world, a mode that's more about experiential knowledge. Sometimes we'll hear this articulated as a difference between dualistic thinking, rational thinking, versus contemplative sort of thinking, or experiential sort of thinking. That's not based upon tearing apart a sentence to determine whether or not the sentence is true or false. It's the sort of knowledge you get from experiencing something rather than knowing what beer is in terms of what makes up beer, right? Certain chemicals. It's the result of a certain process. It's the actual knowledge of beer, what it tastes like. So all these religions seem to say, according to the Perennial Philosophy, that we can have a taste for reality. We can have a taste for the ultimate nature of things, from which all things manifest, all things arise. The Perennial Philosophy says that through all of these religions, we get this picture that human beings possess a double nature, that there is a finite self, there is a limited self, but there's also an infinite self, there is an eternal self. So we can take a look at Brahman and how it articulates there's Atman and then there's Brahman. And the truth is, Atman is Brahman. The separate you is actually the big you, is actually the everything. Similarly, um, with Islam, we notice that there is this emphasis on delving into the divine, having a direct experience of divine, because oneself is divine, right? We come from divinity. When we take a look at Christianity, there is this notion that uh, we often see ourselves in terms of this finite kingdom, the kingdom of our culture, when in fact our identity is actually that belongs to a greater kingdom, right? An eternal kingdom. According to the Perennial Philosophy, all these various religions are then also saying that the purpose of a human life, the purpose of your life, is to identify your small self with that greater self, to come to some sort of realization that this finite existence, this small existence, is not who you really are. That you are part of something much larger. That you need that your rightful place is in a kingdom that's much greater than the one you believe in, than the one you see on an everyday basis. Right? So when we talk about kingdom of God, when we talk about kingdom of heaven, Christianity, when we talk about Brahman in Hinduism, when we talk about finding oneself in line with the Tao, right? uh, according to the Perennial Philosophy, they're all relating the same sort of phenomena. That the purpose of our lives is not this mundane, everyday sort of existence, but to come to our realization that we are more than this. Right? There's something greater for us than this. We are we are it. We are part of the everything. We are part of that underlying ground from which everything arises. That is us. And when we took a look at process philosophy, right, we are an element, an aspect of the divine. Coming to knowledge of that, coming to a realization of that, seems to be what, according to the Perennial Philosophy, all major religions emphasize, what they all say. Now, again, this is one particular approach to religious pluralism, the belief in the Perennial Philosophy that all religions are pointing to the same thing. They're all saying the same thing about humanity. They're all saying the same thing about what the purpose of of human life is, how to transcend our human condition. There's another approach. There's actually several approaches, but we'll talk about one other approach to religious pluralism, and that is the notion that maybe all religions are true, but not because they're all saying the same thing. Maybe all religions are true because they all provide different paths to dealing with different human problems. So this stems from a book entitled God is Not One, and this is by a professor of religion at Boston University, Stephen Prothero. And in his book, he advocates this position that rather than seeing all religions as um, pointing to the same summit, instead of seeing all religions as providing a path to the same place or describing the human condition the same way, Prothero emphasizes the possibility that instead, maybe all of these different religions are different human approaches to dealing with different human problems. So if you're dealing with suffering, right? you're trying to compensate or find an approach to dealing with an exaggerated um, sense of negativity, an exaggerated viewpoint of pessimism, maybe Buddhism is the correct approach or best approach for you. If you're dealing with a sense of meaninglessness, if you're dealing with a sense of how to deal with all the unwanted circumstances, or how to make sense of all the unwanted circumstances that occur in your life, maybe your approach should be more of a Judaic one. If you seem lost, if you feel as if you're bound to circumstances that are inherently limiting, maybe what you need is maybe you need a Christian approach to see that your rightful place is in a greater kingdom. If you feel out of joint with the world, if you feel as if things aren't going as smoothly as they can, maybe your approach should be more of a Taoist one. So the idea here is, all religions, all major religions are valid. All major religions are telling the truth, but it's not because they're all saying the same thing. For Prothero, maybe it's because they're all different prescriptions to different human problems. In your text, Houston Smith highlights various aspects of religions that seem to be common, seem to be similar. He notes that all major religions share some sort of ethic that says things like murder, things like stealing, things like lying, things like adultery are not good. They all seem to point at similar virtues, that we should develop a sense of humility, that we should be selfless, that we should develop compassion and be charitable, that we should strive for truth, we should strive for knowledge of reality. All religions, all major religions seem to have a similar vision, that there's something that in the world, things are much more connected than we often believe them or we often see them as being. But even though we with our eyes and with our senses feel as if things are separate, that in reality, underneath it all, there's a connectivity that lies beneath the surface, and that life itself is better than it usually appears to us. So we've taken a look now at 3 different approaches to religious pluralism. Now, the big question, of course, is what should your approach be to religious diversity? Should it be to have an atheistic point of view, an agnostic point of view? Should it be to have a religious exclusivist point of view, a religious inclusivist point of view? Should it be to be a religious relativist? Or should it be to be a religious pluralist? Now, this sort of discussion about these approaches to religious diversity makes sense if we are looking at religions primarily as belief systems. If we think of religions as as a list of beliefs or clubs that have certain beliefs, then it might be appropriate to have these sorts of approaches to religious diversity. And this is what you'll hear oftentimes when people talk about religious diversity. These are the common approaches, and they'll often debate whether or not they should be agnostic because they don't know enough, whether they should be a relativist because everyone has their own point of view. What's being assumed is we're treating religions as organizations or clubs that have certain belief systems. However, that wasn't the primary approach to religions in our class. If you remember, our class is taking a look not primarily at beliefs, but primarily at religions as the ways in which people have experienced their world. By looking at various religions, we're taking a look at various cultures. And what we see through the religion is the framework with which they are experiencing reality. It's the framework with which they are experiencing their lives and giving it meaning. Now, just an example. If I were to describe what life is, there are several different ways to do that. I mean, I could describe a life in terms of a biological definition of life. I could describe a life in terms of uh, what we do in it, right? Life is about working hard. Life is about earning money. Life, we can do that, describe life. I could say life is like a camera. If you take a if you take a bad picture, you can always give it another shot. I can say something like life is like riding a bicycle. The only way to stay balanced is to keep moving. I could say life is like a box of chocolates, right? You never know what you're going to get. Meaning life is full of variety, it's full of surprises. Sometimes life is sweet, sometimes life is sour, sometimes life is not so good. These are all different frameworks through which people can experience life. You can experience life like riding a bike. You can experience life like taking a photo. You can experience life like it's a box of chocolates. These are different frameworks by which one can experience life. Now, is one of those frameworks more right than the other? If you treat these as beliefs, right? Literally, is life a photo? Is life like taking a picture? Is life literally a box of chocolates? If you treat them as beliefs, then you can have discussions about whether or not we want to be agnostic, whether or not we want to be inclusivist, whether or not we believe in relativism. But we're treating these religions as frameworks. We're treating them as the lens by which people in the past have experienced their world. Just like when you think of life as like a box of chocolates, or life is like riding a bicycle, or life is like a camera, they're not necessarily meant to be taken literally. Instead, they're meant to give you a new way of experiencing or looking at life and how you should best live in it. So in this sense, our class has really been a pluralist class, right? We're taking a look at all these various cultures and saying, well, I mean, this is how they experience the world. It's not that it's a right or wrong experience. It's their experience. You can't say whether or not their experience is right or wrong if they're telling us what they experienced. Now, any sort of declarative statement about reality we can question, right? Because that's a belief. But in terms of how did they experience what they went through, it's what they went through. And for us, there might be things that can be gleaned by seeing how other people have experienced the world. Understanding how various individuals see their lives and make sense of their lives. I mean, there might be something useful, some sort of wisdom that could be gained in there. And this is what we'll delve into and discuss more in our next lecture.